Before we start to discuss Jude, I want to start by painting a picture. Let's say that you are outside on a hot day, and if you didn't know, by the way, the hot days are here now. The cool and comfortable ones are gone. They're all hot days. So you're outside on a hot day, doing whatever it is you're doing, and you feel something on your leg. Maybe it's like just a slight tingle, maybe on your calf muscle. You don't think much of it. Maybe it's just the wind. You just kind of shake your leg, and you think, okay, no big deal. About a minute later, you feel a similar tingle on your scalp this time. This time you might be starting to get a little bit worried, but you scratch at your head, you don't feel anything, you don't notice anything there, and you think, okay, it's probably no big deal. Maybe it's my imagination. Finally, another minute later, your worst fears are confirmed when you most definitely feel something crawling on your neck. You don't know what it is. It could be a roach or a beetle or a ladybug or a scorpion. Who knows what it is? When you see that, what do? How does that make you feel? Something has crept in where it doesn't belong. How do you feel about it in that moment? Maybe some of you are more outdoorsy than I am, and you feel a bug around your person, and it doesn't bother you. I'm sorry, I'm a city dweller. That is not how it is with me. I freak out when I feel a bug that's around me. I'm going to shake like a crazy person until I get rid of it. And then afterward, I'm probably going to take an hour-long shower to make sure that whatever it was that was crawling on me didn't have any friends. Then I'm going to burn my clothes in an inferno of glory to get rid of them, and then I'm fumigating the house. I don't like things that don't belong crawling on me. I don't know if that is what you guys are like. In my mind, as this happens, though, and I'm trying to dodge bugs as a part of my normal everyday life, I feel like I'm graceful when I do it. I feel like I'm athletic while I'm dodging the bugs, but I think in all likelihood, I really look more like this. I have the first thing that I'd like you to see. That, of course, is Chris Farley from one of his worst movies, which is saying a lot, called Almost Heroes, but pretty funny. When you see a bug or you feel it on you, you can't help it. You shake like a crazy person. The bug does not belong on you. Many people have had experiences where they see a dangerous animal of some sort that doesn't belong end up in a place where you don't want them. Many people who have gone camping have found bears end up getting into places where they shouldn't be. A tent, a cabin, a car. I have a picture of one of these. Many people have felt and seen things like this happen. In 2016, passengers on a Mexican airline saw a 3-foot-long snake fall from the overhead bin in the middle of the flight. Literal snakes on a plane. A couple of people know what I'm talking about. There are actual snakes on that plane. In 2019, a woman in Florida walked into her kitchen at 3 a.m. to get a glass of water and found an 11-foot alligator chilling by her cabinets on her kitchen floor. This is not the picture from that actual event, but it's similar. A giant alligator in the spot where they belong. So when you see something like this happen, you open your toilet and there's a snake inside. You see a rodent scurry out from under your bed. What do? What do you do in that moment? Our very own worship pastor, Chris Cohen, voice of an angel. That's how I introduce him to people if they don't know him. Voice of an angel, Chris Cohen. He is more of an outdoorsman than I am. So he actually will go out and do things in the wilderness. He is not a city person like me. And he told me a story that about 3 years ago, he was on a little trip. He went to Huntsville State Park, and he wanted to get out in nature and go fishing. And so he was out on the water in a kayak, and he was standing in the kayak fishing. He was kind of near the edge of the water, I believe. By the way, I'm going to try and get this story as accurately as I can, but pastors have been known to embellish details a time or two. So I'll try to be factual here. But he's standing and he's fishing, and in the process of that, he sees a splash in the water that he thinks might be a big fish, but in a moment later, he found out that it was not a big fish. He sees a large alligator swimming at him quickly, charging him, and he sees the tail whipping. So for me, if I'm in that situation, which I would never be in, but if I was in that situation, I'm thinking, Jesus, take the wheel. It's over. I'm getting my affairs in order. But Chris sat down on the kayak and started whacking the water with this fishing pole, and it got the gator to stop charging, which I learned something new, that will stop a gator from charging. So the gator goes away for a second, and Chris starts fishing again. Are you serious? He starts fishing. A few minutes later, that same alligator starts to charge him again. He sees the tail whipping, and he whacks the water again, and the gator kind of goes down and keeps its eye above the water. And at that point, Chris was like, okay, it's probably time for me to move. You think? I mean, come on, the first time, that was your sign. So then he moved, And then when he looked back, he noticed why he was getting charged. The baby alligator was very close to where his kayak was. And so mama was coming to protect the baby. Now, for Chris, he still does outdoor things. For me, if I had that experience, I'll just tell you what would have happened. I would have gotten out of the water. I would have put that kayak into a wood chipper. I would have gone home, put my house on the market, and moved to a state where alligators do not live. When an animal gets to a place where it shouldn't be and it's dangerous, you have a couple options. You can either try to fight the animal, which I have a rendering of what our minds might be doing when we're fighting an animal. This is from a commercial, by the way, from many years ago. It's a salmon commercial. You can fight the animal, which is not how that actually works. The answer is this. When you see something dangerous, get to a place where it doesn't belong. You see imminent danger. The answer is pretty simple. You get out. You get away. If you find the alligator in your kitchen, you don't try and catch it. You run and you call the police or somebody, your mom. You try and get someone else to deal with the issue for you. When you see danger, you need to get out. And that is the message that we are going to talk about tonight. When you see real, imminent danger that has crept into a place where it doesn't belong, don't flirt with it. Don't stay near it. You need to separate yourself from the thing that could kill you. Chris, we maybe could not be hearing his beautiful vocals. He was too close to that alligator. Terrifying. When you see danger, you get out. And that is what Jude has in mind in our verses today. So we are going to pick up in the second part of verse 3 of Jude. If you remember, Jude is the second to last book of the Bible, right before the book of Revelation. It only has one chapter. And last week we talked about the intro to this, who Jude was, probably the brother of Jesus and a leader in the early church. And he says this. He says, I felt the necessity to write to you, appealing that you contend earnestly for the faith, which was once for all handed down to the saints. Why? For certain persons have crept in unnoticed, those who were long beforehand marked out for this condemnation, ungodly persons who turn the grace of our God into licentiousness and deny our only Master and Lord, Jesus Christ. If you remember, we talked about this last week. Jude says, I was going to write to you about our common salvation, but I've had to change course and tell you that you need to fight earnestly for the faith, the real faith that was handed down to you. And the reason he says is that there are people who have crept in unnoticed, like the bug or scorpion or whatever that crawls onto your body without you knowing, like the alligator who moves in through your AC unit in your window to get into your kitchen, like the bear. A bear does not creep in unnoticed. They just kind of probably tear things up. But it's a dangerous person who's come in when you didn't see it, and if you do what they want you to do, it will lead to your destruction. Jude explains in this way, who are the people who are the danger? It's the people who deny that Jesus is Lord. So here's how he describes them. I won't talk at length about every part of his description, but he says this. They are people who have long beforehand been marked out for condemnation, meaning that it's not a surprise that people like this will be among you, is what he's saying. So there could be more theological implications to what he's saying there. We won't dig all the way into it. But he's saying these people have been known from long ago that they would be here. And he says they are ungodly people who take God's grace and turn it into licentiousness. I hinted at this last week. I like that we're reading Jude now because it kind of presents the opposite problem that the Galatian church was having. The Galatian church was having people come in and say, you need to take on really specific ethnic markers to please God. This group of people that they're dealing with are people that are saying, if you just know the right things, it doesn't matter what you do. You can do anything that you want. Licentiousness literally means having license to do whatever you please. It ultimately means rejecting the bounds that God has put on the world, saying, if God says that something is right or wrong for you to do, a licentious person would say, no, there's no rules. I can do whatever it is that I want. And ultimately, what they do is that they deny that Jesus is Lord. They deny that Jesus is the one who is in charge. And so Jude is saying, any person who is in your orbit, who is trying to convince you in whatever way that the way God tells you to live is how you should actually live, if they are trying to get you to move away from that, their end is destruction, and they will pull you with them. So the idea here is what we said before. They've crept in unnoticed. They are dangerous. So what should we do? Get out. Run away. Separate yourself from the person that will pull you from the Lord. Fortunately, Jude gives us some more specifics about what these people might look like, and he gives us different examples of the kind of things that we need to avoid. So let's go ahead and pick up in verse 5. In the first group that he's going to talk to us about are the unbelieving that are blended in among God's people. He says, "Now I desire to remind you, though you know all things once for all, that the Lord, after saving a people out of the land of Egypt, subsequently destroyed those who did not believe." Jude takes us back early in the Old Testament. God has chosen Abraham and his family, rescues them out of slavery in Egypt, says, "I have plans for you." But you may remember, the story did not go particularly smoothly from there. The first generation of those Israelites that came out of Egypt, they had to wander in the wilderness for 40 years. And why was it? Unbelief. Unbelief is the answer. They did not believe the Lord. And at multiple intervals, people from among that group ended up being judged by the Lord. I'll just go through a few of them. Over and over, you hear this refrain in the Exodus narrative. People from among Israel saying, "It was better when we were in Egypt. At least we had food when we were in Egypt. We're hungry." Sounds like your family, when you're going around your kids. "We're hungry. We're angry." There was a time when something very similar happened. The Israelites were whining to the Lord about food, saying it was better where we were before. God sends a plague of serpents that start biting them and killing some of the people from among them. The only way they get saved is that Moses makes a bronze serpent on a pole, holds it in the air. Whoever looks to the serpent ended up being saved. Many of them at different times complained about the food. God seems to have sent a plague of overeating that wiped out many of the Israelites. The biggest one of all was when Moses went up the mountain to get the law. The thing that the Israelites immediately did was they pulled their gold, made it into a cow, started worshiping it, and at that time, God judged a large group of them. And it leads us to this point that even when God chooses a group of people, there will be unbelievers among and scattered within God's people. It's been like that from the beginning. It was like that with the Israelites. It is like that even now. In Romans 9, Paul says it this way. He says, "We know that not all who have descended from Israel are really Israel." That's the way he describes it at that point. So the way you would maybe say it this way, not all who claim the moniker of being a Christian are really of Christ. Not all people who say that they belong to the Lord really belong to him. And that makes things difficult because you could be in a body of believers that many are earnest and many are really following the Lord, but there could be some among them that really don't believe. Jesus addressed this very specifically in Matthew chapter 13. He tells a parable that says this: "The kingdom of heaven may be compared to a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while his men were sleeping, his enemy came and sowed tares among the wheat and went away. But when the wheat sprouted and bore grain, then the tares became evident also. The slaves of the landowner came and said to him, 'Sir, did you not sow good seed in your field? How then did it have tares?' And he said to them, 'An enemy has done this.' The slaves said to him, 'Do you want us then to go and gather them up?'" So the parable starts, a man sows seed in a field, good seed, and as it starts to come up, the people working for the man realize that there are weeds among the actual wheat, among the good plants. So they said, "Do you want us to get rid of the weeds?" Verse 29. But he said, "No. For while you are gathering up the tares, you may uproot the wheat with them. Allow both to grow together until the harvest. And in the time of the harvest, I will say to the reapers, first, gather up the tares and bind them in bundles and burn them up, but gather the wheat into my barn." So in this parable, you have a farmer who's planting something that he wants to grow, wheat in this case. And an enemy comes in and deliberately tries to sabotage the crop by throwing seeds of weeds into the field, wheat and weeds. As they start to grow up, they see that they're intermingled, and the master at the end says, "Do not pull up the bad stuff yet. If you pull it up, it might pull up the roots of the good stuff too. Let's wait until the end when we can distinguish it well. Then we will separate the wheat from the chaff. The chaff we will burn, the wheat we will keep." I have a picture here that shows what wheat looks like before it is fully harvestable, and then the tares, the weeds next to it. You might notice they look extremely similar when they're growing. Extremely similar. You can tell the difference if you look closely, but they very closely mimic each other until the time comes that it's ready for harvest. Then it's much easier to tell which one's the actual wheat. It changes color. It looks different. And Jesus says that the kingdom of God is like this. From the beginning, even from Israel, the wheat and the weeds were together. The church is the same way. The enemy has sown seed within God's people that we may not always very easily be able to distinguish between the two. The time will come in the end when it's very obvious. The Lord is not going to wholesale judge people yet because he doesn't want to take up the good stuff, the roots of the good things, with the actual weeds. But the day will come when that happens. But what that tells us is that there are people among God's people that if we listen to them, if we follow them, if we do what they do, they will bring destruction to our life. The way that Jude has said it here is that these people were marked out for destruction from before. That means every part of their life, not just their future, but even the current, they'll be bringing destruction to it. So how can you tell the wheat from the chaff? It's hard to tell, by the way. It's not always easy, but here are some words of advice that maybe we can look to. The one is this: we need to watch what people say. A very quick way, if you watch someone long enough, they can fake being close to the Lord with the way that they talk for a while, but if you watch closely, eventually it's going to come out. I told y'all the joke a few weeks ago that Dave Ramsey tells about donkeys and thoroughbreds in the workplace, and he says, don't worry, if you listen to a donkey long enough, it can't help itself. It's gonna, it's gonna happen at some point. That's true with people that are not walking closely to the Lord. If you watch closely what they say, eventually you might be able to distinguish them. The next, and this is pretty simple too, watch what they do. Not just what they say, but what they do. Is their life living up to the standards of what God has told us in his word? And then along with that is you look at the fruit that people bear. If you're trying to determine who is worth following, who is worth listening to, you've got to look at the fruit of their life. You've got to look at the way that they behave on a personal level. You've got to hear the words that they say and see if it matches up with God's word. The reality is there are weeds that are sown among the good stuff. So we have to be careful. We have to be watchful. And I've said this before to you, I think. You cannot outsource your spiritual growth to other people, because not every person who is speaking into your life is going to speak the truth of God's word. So that's the first group. The second group, and this is where it starts to get weird, and it's going to get even weirder next week, are this: angels who fight against God's authority. Verse 6 says this: and angels who did not keep their own domain, but abandoned their proper abode. He has kept in eternal bonds until darkness for the judgment of the great day. Very self-explanatory. We know exactly what he's talking about. Very easy. No, this is hard. Right now we're talking about an opaque part of God's created order that we don't entirely understand. But what Jude tells us is that God created angels just like he created humans, and it seems that God has designed different angels with different jobs, different domains that they are supposed to work within. And so we get descriptions of some of them in different parts of the Bible. You have cherubim and seraphim and these different kind of angels. The ones in Ezekiel that if you read it and you try and draw a picture of what you're reading is very disturbing. It's like wheels with eyes that are rotating. Anyway, there's different types of angels that have different jobs. And apparently, from what the Bible tells us, some of those that were commissioned to do certain jobs did not want to do what God wanted them to do. And so what we're probably talking about are demons here. The idea that there are angels that were given jobs that deny the actual lordship of Jesus and go do what they want to do anyway. There's a strange story in Genesis chapter 6 that Jude's probably talking about here. It immediately precedes the flood narrative. So right before God tells Noah to build the ark, it says that a time came where the earth became exceedingly wicked, and it says the sons of God found the daughters of men to be beautiful and had children with them. So what does that mean? I don't know. I mean, it's kind of hard to figure out exactly what it means, except to say, I think the clear takeaway here is there are apparently demonic influences in the world that are trying to fight against the Lord. Now, I have known people, and maybe you have too, that get way far down the rabbit hole, trying to know all the intricacies about what angels and demons are and how they interact with people. I don't think that's very fruitful for us to do, other than to say that it is real, that God created angels just like he created people, and there are influences going on in the world, an enemy that is sowing seed that is beyond really our capacity to know what he's doing. And we have to be careful. I would just say it this way: demonic stuff, it's not something to be trifled with. We know enough about it to know that you shouldn't mess with it. And be careful. It is real, and it's in the world. If you go down that path, and by the way, demonic things in the Bible usually always lead to violence and sexual immorality. Those two things are almost always paired with demonic activity. So just be wary. Things that you need to be careful of. And finally, this one's a little more applicable, starting in verse 7. He starts to talk about the licentious cultures of the world. Just as Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities around them, since they, in the same way as these, indulged in gross immorality and went after strange flesh, are exhibited as an example in undergoing the punishment of eternal fire. I won't retell the whole story now, but Sodom and Gomorrah is a famous story in Genesis chapters 19 and 20. There are two cities that we find out were exceedingly wicked. God tells Abraham, I'm about to judge these cities. Abraham tries to barter with God and said, what if there are 40 righteous men? Would you judge the cities? And God said no. And it turns out there were only 5 people righteous enough to not be judged. And those 5, it was an extremely low bar. They were very wicked cities. And what we know about Sodom and Gomorrah, and Jude tells us here explicitly, they were extremely sexually immoral. They took the godly desires that God gives us in our sexual drive, and they perverted it outside of what God wanted. They abused their power. They wanted to abuse people. We know this just in that Sodom and Gomorrah story. And so God punishes them as an example, and Jude says it this way, of eternal fire that will come later. Eternal fire. So what does Sodom and Gomorrah symbolize? I think they essentially symbolize a culture that is completely devoid of obeying the Lord. Remember, Jude said at the beginning, these people that you need to be aware of deny that Jesus is Lord. A culture that denies that Jesus is Lord, essentially what it will tell you to do is do whatever feels good to you. Violence, sexual immorality, abusing people, that is what a culture that does not see Jesus as Lord will end up devolving into. And it's not, I won't do this at length right now, but it's not very hard to unravel what's happened in Western culture in the last 150 years. The kind of ideas that the enemy has sown within our culture to essentially say, do whatever you want with your body. It won't hurt anyone. It's just a body. There's nothing behind it. Do whatever you want with it. Violence is right if it's in the correct thing. If I'm violent against the right people, I can do what I want. These kind of ideas make their way into culture. Those are sown by the enemy every time. And the cultures of the world, if it is not being preserved by the Lord, will fall into this. And so I think it's pretty simple. What Jude is warning us of is any influence, whether it is people pretending to be believers in the church, whether it is demonic activity, however that manifests itself, or whether it is what the world is saying to you, anything that is pulling you to deny that Jesus is Lord of your life, not just in a couple areas, but in every area, that is going to lead to pain and destruction in your life. In fact, the ultimate end of those things, and I think Jude's pretty explicit here, is hell. Hell is the result of denying the lordship of Jesus up until the very end. I'm not going to talk about this for a very long time here, but hell is a real topic that appears in the Bible over and over and over again. Jesus talks about it quite a bit. It's there in the Old Testament. It's there certainly in the book of Revelation. The idea that people who reject God into eternity, they end up experiencing something as a result. The Bible tries to give us metaphors to explain what hell is, and so it will say things like that it's a place where the fire is never quenched, and it's pain and it's suffering. And the thing that I think is worth us knowing here is that those are metaphors to try and explain a state of being that we can't fully understand. The same way with heaven. We try and use words to explain something that we can't fully comprehend. But hell is not simply just a place. It's a state of being where we completely reject God. I heard Pastor Ben say this to a group of us this week. He said, hell is a path before it is a place. Hell starts with a person who is rejecting the Lord. In some ways, a person who is experiencing alienation from God in the world is experiencing part of hell now in life. One of the most creative looks at heaven and hell, it's a book that I love. It's a little book by C.S. Lewis, and it's called The Great Divorce. Don't use this book to pull all of your theology on heaven and hell from it. It's meant to be an artistic understanding, a creative look at what heaven and hell might look like. And so the person in the book takes a bus trip from hell up into heaven. And I just want to share a couple of quotes with you that Lewis gives in this book about what hell is. On the one hand, he says this: the gates of hell are locked on the inside. The picture that Lewis paints of hell is not a place that God throws people because they've done the wrong thing and then locks the key from without. Hell is a place that people ultimately choose because they are rejecting God, and they won't leave, even if you gave them the chance to do it. So the more that you sink into selfish decisions of rejecting the Lord, the more you alienate yourself from God and from others, the farther you move away, and that isolation, that complete separation from God, that's ultimately what hell would be. Lewis finally says it this way: God is constantly calling all of us to accept what he's called us to do, to make Jesus Lord. And he says this: there are only two kinds of people in the world in the end: those who say to God, thy will be done, and those to whom God says in the end, thy will be done. All are in hell. All that are there, they choose it. That's what Lewis says. I think that's a pretty good description of what we're talking about with what hell is. It's not just a punishment that God's angry at you and throws you away. God is a God who cares for us and wants us to be in union with him, but he will not coerce you into doing that. If you reject the Lord and reject Jesus as Lord over and over and over again, the end of that is destruction, one way or the other. And Jude's warning is pretty stern. There are people that are like that distributed in your life. Maybe some who pretend to be part of God's people. Maybe some under the influence of demonic activity in their lives. Certainly, broken cultures of the world. And if you follow them, they will lead your life into destruction. And so I think the final thoughts on this are pretty simple. Back to what we said at the beginning. When you know that danger is around, remove yourself from it. Get away from danger. Don't flirt with things that could destroy you in the end. Be watchful. Surround yourself with people that will pour the truth of God's word into your life. And ultimately, if you do that, what you will see in your life is that as Jesus becomes Lord more and more, and you live into that, you become exactly who God made you to be. And you, as that happens, you become closer to the Lord, and as you become closer to the Lord, you find it exactly what you were made to do, who you were made to be, who God has called you to serve. That's what he wants for you and for me, but the first step is that we have to be careful of danger and stay away from it.